Every session, every session you'll recall is 40 legislative days. Today was day 12. It feels really hectic and busy. And yet, on the Senate side, we haven't, and we'll talk about bills, but we haven't taken up so many bills. But it's just the pace seems very different this year than it has in even 2 years ago when it was also an election year. Very busy. The nice thing is that we do have our adjournment calendar, so we know when crossover day is going to be. So right now we're working towards that when, of course, bills have to cross over from one chamber to the next. And I would tell you that in the Senate, we've really gotten in earnest to some of the meaty bills pretty quickly, as of the end of last week. And so we'll kind of talk about that. But taking a step back, it is always good to be back at the Capitol, and back being able to greet people in the Capitol, welcome people back into the People's House, and be able to hear your concerns right there while we're on the ground dealing with particular bills or thinking about bills that may come up. Um, Busy days, though. So I'm going to pause there for a moment and see Representative Evans. Do we want to talk about what did you do your introduction, or did you want to say a little bit more about how the pace has felt for you thus far and what's happening in the House?
Yeah, good idea. And I could not agree more with Senator Halpern that the technical difficulties still par for the course. It's been a weird start to the session in the House. We also have not done a ton yet, though we have done a few things, I think probably more than the Senate for whatever reason. But today was a very strange day for the House, a very sad day. Some of you may have heard in the news that we lost Rules Chairman Richard Smith overnight. Richard Smith is a state representative from Columbus, and he has for several years now been chair of the Rules Committee, which is the final committee that any bill has to move through before it actually gets on the House floor. So it's a very important position in our House, and one that sort of is part of what makes the wheels turn. And so losing him so suddenly like that made for obviously a very sad day, because Richard was a wonderful man, and had a lot of great relationships in the House. But then also just the process felt disrupted today, and of course, folks were sad. So it's been interesting. I think we're about to start going super fast. I feel that. It's like you can feel when it's about to rain. That's sort of how I feel. But otherwise it's been, yeah, a little slow over there. But just in case there are folks on the call that have never been to one of our town halls before, I'm so blessed and fortunate that Senator Halpern and I have been doing these together now for year 3. And our plan is to do what we have done over the last several years, which is to have a series of 3 town halls. So this is our first one. We like to give sort of a, hey, here's what's going on in the first couple of weeks of session, and here's what we think is going to happen. And then, of course, get together again after crossover day, which Senator Halpern alluded to. And then, of course, have a wrap up session so you can see what actually passed, because it's amazing how things that don't pass the House pass the Senate and vice versa. And you think something passed and became law, and then you realize at the end, like, oh, wait, no, it didn't make it across the other chamber, or it changed significantly. And so it's an update for y'all, but it's also a chance for us to catch our breath and see what actually happened. But other than the weird, strange start that we've had in the House, it's business as usual. My committee assignments haven't changed. I'm still on House Judiciary, Appropriations. The subcommittee is transportation within the Appropriations Committee, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. I know a lot of y'all are probably curious about the situation with our bridge on Cheshire Bridge, and just generally the danger of the situation where folks are sleeping under those bridges and starting fires, and the impact that's having on our roads. So very important peg because of that committee that I want to talk about. And then I'm also on the Technology Committee in the House, which is a committee that's sort of been reconstituted, and we're doing some interesting things this year. And then I'm also on the retirement committee, which this district has a lot of state retirees. So I'm very glad to have that platform. But I think that's enough for introductory remarks. I could probably keep talking forever about sort of how things have started and the strangeness of it all. But I think Senator Halpern, do you want to move into one of the categories?
Yeah, I will add, I neglected to say the committees I'm on. One of the good things is both Representative Evans and I both serve on appropriations, and we both serve on the transportation subcommittees under appropriations. So you've got double duty there, thinking about the budget and pushing for what we need and asking the right questions of our Department of Transportation officials. I am now on also banking and financial institutions. I remain on that one. I've been on that one for a number of years. Education and youth, health and human services. I'm the vice chair of urban affairs. And I'm also on public safety, which is a new one for me. So I was appointed last year to public safety when the Senate decided to create a subcommittee under public safety to do a deep dive on the Fulton County Jail and what's happening in the jail. And so because I am the chair of the Fulton County delegation in the Senate, I was placed on that subcommittee. And so I now sit on that committee as well. So that's new for me. But that's good work that we've been doing there. And so while I'm on that topic, let me just tell you a little bit about that. Of course, this is a committee that was launched after all of the deaths were being reported pretty consistently with our Fulton County Jail with the overcrowding. And so the decision was made by leadership in the Senate to really create a subcommittee to do a deeper dive into what was happening there, to see if we couldn't figure out solutions, because we understand that sometimes we have more muscle on some things than local or county jurisdictions may have, but also we recognize, at least I recognize, that some of the issues that we're having in the Fulton County Jail aren't unique to Fulton County. And so when you start to think about all of the justice partners, and we've been hearing from them one by one, what are some of the blockages that we can start to clear out of the way from the state's perspective? And if you don't know, right, there's lots of different pieces to the process. Of course, you've got the sheriff's office, you've got, of course, the DA, you've got the Solicitor General, and you've got the court system. So we've started to have really good meetings, quite honestly. And we've heard from the Sheriff's Association writ large on some of the issues, and our sheriff. We've heard from the DA's office. And we will definitely be inviting members of the court to talk about where there might be opportunities to create, better processes there. So that's been a little bit of the work happening there. I have not. I'm an ex officio member of the overall public safety committee, which I just learned that I actually sit on the full public safety committee. So I've just learned that, and tomorrow will be my first full meeting in the public safety committee. But if we take a step back to the beginning, since this is our first report out to you, let us go back to week 1, where we literally hear from the governor through his State of the State address what his priorities are. And we do that through his address in the joint House and Senate, as well as a Georgia Chamber event called Eggs and Issues. And I would say that we heard a few things that were expected and a few surprises that really do set the tone for what we can anticipate for this session in terms of his priorities, including his budget priorities. And so he definitely it talked quite a bit about infrastructure and making investments there. And there's a big appropriation in the budget around that for Department of Transportation. We'll talk more about that. Last year, you may remember there was a bill for vouchers that the House actually was able to stop. That thing passed through the Senate and the House defeated it, which would have taken money allowed parents to take $6,500 and follow their child to a private school from a public school. But the governor really did make an indication that school choice and that voucher bill is going to be a priority. So that's something that I think we can anticipate. I was expecting him to talk more about tort reform. Frankly, all summer and all of the study committees that I was on, tort reform kept coming up. This issue around insurance companies and us being able to continue to attract insurance companies to our state. But that ended up being downplayed in the governor's remarks. And so we'll see what kind of legislation we may see get pushed anyway. But that was a little bit of a surprise to me. He did not mention Medicaid expansion. So we'll talk fully with you about that. But he did not mention that after all of the news reports really started, I think, to get us all excited about the idea that maybe this will be the year. The governor has not actually said much about it at all himself. What else am I missing, Representative Evans, in terms of the governor kind of setting a tone for the session?
Yeah, I think you hit on the main things there. One thing I was sort of surprised about was that you didn't hear any grand plans of how to, or maybe I wasn't surprised, maybe I was only a little bit surprised, but mostly disappointed, that the governor did not talk about any sort of visionary grand investments that we can make with the record surpluses that we have right now. If you've read in the news, and I know this is a very informed district, you've seen that we have record surpluses right now, upwards of $11 billion. I think is the current number, maybe even higher than that, that we have in just extra money. And I don't mean to say that we should spend all the extra money, because that's not right. You do always want to make sure that you have a rainy day fund, and that if we have a dip in tax revenue collections and things of that sort, that you have money to keep the government open. But usually a healthy reserve is around $4 billion. So you're talking about more than double that number. And that is an opportunity for the state to really make some investments in some infrastructure that would pay over time, whether that's an investment in pre-K or other investments in people in the workforce that could be made, or in our infrastructure like transit and things like that. Instead, what we've seen, and this wasn't surprising because we had heard the rumblings of it during the special session that we had on the redistricting, that there is going to be a tax refund. And I am all about getting money back in the hands of people. But when you think about what is going to actually make a difference in folks' lives, the lowest income Georgians are likely, they're not paying into the tax system as much as others. And so they're not likely to see the same sort of refund, and also bang for the buck. If you were to put some money into pre-K or education investments or into infrastructure, that's going to help more people on a larger scale over time. And so that was disappointing, but we are going to see a tax refund of some sort coming through. You did also see the governor announce pay raises across the board for all state employees, of course, including teachers and police. So that is good. For a long time, and even with this raise, I think our state employees, as a general matter, will be underpaid for the work that they do, and we have a lot of turnover. But this is a step in the right direction to address those issues. Some of the funds are being put into the state retiree fund to shore up that fund and make sure that it's healthy in the future. So that is good. But as far as, this is a time when you should have, or it's really an opportunity for vision, and it's really an opportunity for long-term investments. And it would have been nice to see that out of budget week, but we just didn't see it. But while we're talking about money, I know I saw City Council person Alex Wan is on, and I know it's an issue near and dear to his heart right now in our area around Cheshire Bridge. Hey, Alex. There was another fire that shut that bridge down again. And so that's mostly an Atlanta DOT issue because it is a city road, but the clusters of unhoused folks that are congregating other bridges is not limited to just city roads. Y'all all know that you will find those areas under plenty of state roads and bridges too. And those of you that have lived in the neighborhood long enough to remember, there was a bridge fire that affected a state and federal highway interchange a few years back. So this is not, while this most recent example happened under a city bridge and city road, obviously this is happening. Obviously this is happening and can happen in areas that are controlled by GDOT. So in our most recent subcommittee meeting for transportation appropriations, we had the GDOT commissioner with us, and I asked him about this issue. And while he initially just sort of talked about how what just happened was a city issue, he did acknowledge, and I appreciated very much that he acknowledged that we are in this together because it can happen under state roads and under state bridges and around state roads. He also recognizes that when you have a transportation issue in Metro Atlanta on a city road, it is impossible for that not to impact a state road. And so we're all in it together and we've got to tackle it. So that was encouraging because he said they were in talks with the city of Atlanta. And of course, we're following up to make sure that's true and remains true. But then I want to share with you a conversation I had today with the subcommittee, Transportation Appropriations Subcommittee Chairman, Clay Perkle, who's not from Metro Atlanta, but he pulled me aside and specifically said, I'm concerned about that issue you raised. And I want you to know that we are gonna look at that. And that is gonna be a priority. It's something that I'm talking to GDOT about because tomorrow it's us. And we don't want to keep spending money repairing bridges when we know what's causing the problem. And while GDOT is not a social services organization, I get that. We're all in together and we need to think about how do we move folks, recognizing the human aspect of this. We need to make sure that we're moving folks towards services, but also doing what we can do from a practical standpoint to make it less inviting to congregate and sleep under these bridges because it causes a problem. It's not healthy for the folks that are unhoused. It's not good for the neighborhoods and it snares traffic and obviously causes lots of extra problems. So lots of talk right now, but I am so encouraged by this. I've never had a subcommittee chairman come and say, I'm taking that on. So that is very good. And then the last thing I'll say about that is just to give some kudos to the city, to Alex, Juan, and the council and to the mayor for announcing that we're going to have, I think it's $4.something million to $4.7 million, thanks, Alex, to put toward addressing homelessness and how we move folks towards services so that we are not just on repeat with this issue. Because those of you, again, that have lived here long enough, you know that this is not the first time this has happened. And unfortunately, we know this will not be the last. So that's a long-winded update to say we're moving in the right direction and all hands are on deck, state, city, we're all in contact with each other. So that doesn't mean that we don't want you to keep reaching out because we do. And if you have ideas and if you have thoughts, particularly, how nonprofit communities can help, please do continue to reach out. But I just did want y'all to know that, that we are on it and working really hard together. Alex, did you want to say anything on that really quickly?
You hit it. We're working together. I mean, it's a problem that we can't just fix in one place because it's going to move somewhere else. We have to look at it comprehensively, and that's why everybody's at the table.
Thank you. So that's budgeting. What should we talk about next? Senator Halpern, or I can push into a little bit of healthcare talk if you.
Yes, let's do healthcare.
Okay. Y'all remember that 2 years ago, Georgia passed a very sweeping and comprehensive mental health bill that was huge. Lots of opportunities there and a lot of infrastructure put in place, a lot of groundwork done. Last year, we were hoping to expand on that, but unfortunately that bill got caught up in some last minute House and Senate fighting and other things and didn't cross all the way through. But I feel strong commitment. I sense strong commitment to continuing to make progress on that bill, a supplement to the mental health expansion that we did. And I'm very much encouraged, not just by those discussions that we're hearing about how we want to make sure that we shore up what we started, but also because of the appointment of Kevin Tanner to be commissioner over this area and make sure that we are implementing the programs that were passed in that legislation 2 years ago. Kevin Tanner was a member of the State House of Representatives from Gainesville for several years, and he was known as the go-to guy for the hard legislation, the legislation that was going to have lots of stakeholders, lots of agencies, lots of private interest, sort of everybody coming and telling you all the reasons that you can't. And instead of being the guy that would just say, oh, this is too hard, he was the one that would always dig in and get it done. And he did a major transportation bill and some other bills while he was in the House. And so for him to be appointed here is a great sign that this was not just a piece of legislation to pass and put on the shelf to pat ourselves on the back, that we really intend to follow up on these programs. So that is moving, very exciting. And then the other big healthcare thing is I never want to get too excited because I feel like I've gotten excited about this a couple of times, but we're hearing rumbles about some form of Medicaid expansion. Senator Halpern was right that we didn't hear the governor speak about it, and that would have been nice. But we are hearing other leaders, at least on the House side, talk about it. It's not going to be the full-blown Medicaid expansion that I know a lot of us would like to see, but I have been hearing a lot of talk about the Arkansas model. And I could not explain to you all the ins and outs of what that means, but it is a step in the right direction for us to expand it all. And part of that expansion may be a compromise with folks who have for years wanted to see some change in our certificate of need laws here in the state of Georgia, which is where you can't just go out and open a hospital or open a clinic. You have to have permission from the state to do so, and you have to show a need in the community for another healthcare facility. That's what the certificate of need is. And there are lots of restrictions around that. And I think for good reason, because hospitals rely on a certain mix of patients, some paying that have insurance, and then some that we know are not going to pay and are going to require indigent care, or maybe on some sort of government subsidy that where the rates are not paid as much. And if all of the insured patients go to private clinics that are put up separately, then the hospital will only be getting the non-paying patients, and then they'll have to close. And obviously nobody wants that to happen. But there is room for some balance there to let some more folks in, perhaps, to set up clinics in certain areas. And so there is talk of opening up that certificate of need program to be a little bit more welcoming of new facilities. But all of this is very early days. It's fun right now. It feels like I'm being a sportscaster and talking about what might happen. So I could be completely wrong. Absolutely none of this could happen, or all of it could happen. But it is exciting, at least, that it wasn't shut down from the get-go, which I felt like has been the case in certain other years. Are you hearing anything different on the Senate side?
No, actually, the talk about Medicaid expansion, even with this Arkansas model, really seems to have been driven from the House side, not the Senate side. But the conversation of certificate of need, I think, is very, very aligned to Medicaid expansion. It's my sense that if we were to make some reforms to certificate of need, then Medicaid expansion becomes that much more important, quite honestly, and I'll explain why in just a second. Let me just tell you all that both the House and the Senate over this interim both had study committees that delved into certificate of need and studied certificate of need and the issues of certificate of need. If I'm not mistaken, the House's recommendation was for reform, and the Senate's recommendation was for absolute total repeal. So there would need to be some, come to Jesus between the chambers as to what kind of changes would happen to certificate of need. And I think that, you've got states that have completely repealed it. You've got other states that have reformed it. So I'm not sure where Georgia might end up. But if we were to make changes, it becomes that much more critical that Medicaid is expanded because of what Representative Evans said, and that need to have the right kind of patient mix so that you're not actually jeopardizing existing facilities that are already there, that are also taking care of patients who may or may not have private insurance. So that patient mix is really it's the difference maker between whether a facility can survive or cannot survive. Because it's really the private insurers help to really subsidize those who don't have insurance at all, or even those who have Medicaid. So I'll tell you a little bit as from what I understand about the Arkansas model. It is not full Medicaid expansion, which of course is something that we have been advocating for over a decade. But what it does do that is kind of interesting is it actually puts individuals onto the exchange. And so people get to choose their insurer, and they get basically reimbursed for the cost of that insurance that they themselves purchase, but they look to be like they're insured by a private insurer, and with all the benefits of preventative care that comes with that. So that's kind of the distinction. Medicaid, you'd get your Medicaid card and you would use that card, and it would be paid for kind of because you're insured through the state effectively, where the Arkansas model, you are insured through a third party insurer, but the state will pay and cover the cost of that insurance. So I've heard some positive things, honestly, about how it's worked in Arkansas. I've also heard that in time, Arkansas saw some challenges and may, in fact, move to full Medicaid expansion. Whichever way we go in Georgia, and I hope, knock on wood, that we actually will take a step towards something this session. It will be better than what we have now, because ultimately the concern, and it's a concern that's shared by everybody, Democrat, Republican, it doesn't matter. Everybody does want to figure out a way to close the coverage gap and get more people insured so that more people can have access to healthcare, particularly preventative healthcare. So we'll see what happens with those conversations. I wanted to touch on, you mentioned the commissioner of the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities. I wanted to also echo what you said. He's a great advocate for mental health. I happen to be the co-chair of the Georgia General Assembly's working group on addiction and recovery. He has shown himself to be a great advocate of that community as well, and has definitely made some investments through his department in terms of making sure that the Georgia Council on Recovery on substance abuse, is able to do some really incredible campaigns. We just celebrated ARAD, Addiction Recovery Awareness Day, at the Capitol last week with over 1,000 people in attendance. So I wanted to give him a shout out for that. And also around developmental disabilities. The governor did, let me pull it up. The governor did, where did it go? The governor did announce in his budget recommendation, well, actually, the department itself announced when they came and gave us when they came and spoke to us in our budget hearing, that they have done a study about where the needs are and how to grow. We have had for years 7,000 plus people on the waiting list for now comp waivers. This is for kind of in-home care. And what the governor's budget does have in it is $9.3 million. Last year, we approved 500 additional now comp waivers. In order to annualize that comes to $9.3 million. That is in the budget. They have also asked for, and the dollars are in the budget for, 100 additional waivers. That seems like a low number compared to the 500 we did last year and the 500 we did the year before. But they actually did do a study as well and realized that every year, for whatever reason, 400 people rolled off. So really, with the annualization of the dollars, even though they're asking for 100 new waivers, there will be 500 new total people who actually are able to get it. And they're also asked for money to fund the rate study at 40% increase for providers, because we do know that the rates that we're paying our providers are way too low. And so we've got to do some work on that. On the topic of providers and rates, know that there is a conversation also about Medicaid reimbursable rates, and how if we could improve that, it would also help us improve the number of healthcare workers potentially that we have in the state. That is one of the things we hear pretty often is problematic in terms of keeping doctors, and especially around the state when they can go to other states and actually their Medicaid even reimbursable rates are higher. I'll take just a moment to say that workforce has been a major priority in the Senate from last year and into this year. And so you will we're starting to see, and you will see some activity on the Senate side related to trying to remove some of the bureaucratic processes that keep people from being able to get into the workforce quickly, licensing reform. Tomorrow we will hear a bill on the floor that would give family practitioner, marriage counselors and family therapists reciprocity with other states, so that we can get people who move here quickly back into the field that they're in, understanding that we don't have enough folks who are doing this work. And so that's back to the mental health piece, but we're trying to do everything that we can to make sure that the people who are trained are able to service the people who need to be served.
Yeah, so much going on there. I saw a couple of questions in the chat about property taxes and homestead. And a couple of things that may not address the question directly, but at least things that I'm hearing around that area. You did remind me. So thank you for the question. There is discussion of some sort of property tax break. I just started hearing the rumblings of that. And that sounds great. We all know that home prices have been up and property taxes are forcing folks out of their homes. But on that one, the devil really is going to be in the details. And I want to talk and hear from our local government folks about how that could affect their digest, because property taxes are not something that the state either feels or doesn't. Those are dollars that go to counties, go to school boards, things of that nature. So anytime the state is talking about passing legislation that's going to affect property taxes, which could really only be through homestead, I think we've got to be really careful. And while we want to get excited anytime we can help folks, we just need to be careful there. So that is just starting to bubble up on the House side, at least, that I've started to hear. But one bill that I am very excited about is House Bill 628. And for those of you that get my newsletter, I apologize. It looks like that linked to the wrong bill if you were trying to find it over the weekend. But House Bill 628 would raise the homestead exemptions for folks that are filing for bankruptcy. Those have not been raised in Georgia for over a decade. And it makes a difference because, and I do not practice bankruptcy law. I am a lawyer, but not bankruptcy, and not bankruptcy on purpose, because I find it very tedious and confusing. So bear with me. But if you file for bankruptcy, the trustee obviously can sell certain of your assets to try to pay back your creditors. Selling a home is obviously very expensive. And so trustees will only do that if it's going to be beneficial to the estate, including the carrying costs and the cost to sell, realtor fees and things of that nature, plus just the trustees' cost. And it's always been true in Georgia, and I think in every state to some extent, that a homeowner gets credit for a certain amount of homestead exemption, so that if the property sold, that value would come back to the homeowner. And so in Georgia for a decade now, that number has been $21,500 for a single filer, or $43,000 for a married couple filing jointly and filing for bankruptcy together. And so if we're proposing to raise those numbers to 50,000 and 100,000. And so that just takes extra money off the proposed sale profit and makes it a little bit less enticing for a trustee to want to sell a property, and keeps people in their homes. And obviously that's good for stability of the family, for kids that may be in school, and all the other reasons that we know it's good for folks to stay in their homes. So while folks can have the protection that our system is set up through bankruptcy, it's a good thing for people to be able to stay in their homes. And so this is a bipartisan piece of legislation that has passed the House Judiciary Committee. And I look forward to that. It's got a governor's floor leader is on the bill, as well as some Republicans. So I feel that has a good chance of going, and I think will be very good. Just for comparison, there's a lot of states that have unlimited homestead exemption. So essentially no one ever loses their home in bankruptcy. And a lot of states have much higher homestead exemptions than we do. So we're by no means going to be an outlier by passing this bill. We're going to still be, we would still be sort of middle of the pack, maybe a little bit above average. But I think this is really good, and it's opened up my eyes to an area of legislation that was needed, that it just wasn't something that I was aware of. And so, not exactly the homestead question perhaps that was asked, but I thought this is an example of our state doing something really good to promote stability in communities, and so I wanted y'all to know about it.
I know in the Senate, but I haven't seen the bill yet, so I'm going to speak about it really in gross generalities. But I do know that I believe Senator Jason Estevez is going to bring forward a bill, a local bill dealing with homestead exemption and Atlanta Public Schools, because I believe that APS is one of very few, kind of school districts that doesn't offer any level of homestead exemption. And so I think that there we'll look and figure out what the limits are. But I just wanted to mention it briefly. I wish I had more details on that. I don't, but just know that that is coming. And so even from the school side of your property tax bill, there is an effort underway for us to help protect people more in that regard too. Yeah.
One piece of legislation that I know has been asked about on these town halls in the past that keeps coming back year after year. We all keep getting excited about it, or some of us do, and then we get disappointed, and that is sports betting. So if you have been waiting to download your FanDuel, you may not have to wait much longer. I know a bill passed out of a Senate committee today.
Just this morning.
Yeah. So hopefully that will get passage in the Senate. I know the rumor on the street is that the Speaker of the House is willing to put a sports betting bill on the floor, but only if the Senate does it first. So I guess it's a little bit of a game of chicken here, and y'all are going to have to make the first move, Senator Halpern. But this is something that Georgians are participating in anyway, and not that folks break the law as a reason to change the law, but it is a reality that folks are engaging in this activity. Folks are sometimes they're going out of state to do it so that it's legal. Sometimes they're just doing it here. And there's a lot of revenue generated from this activity that Georgians are generating, but Georgians are not benefiting from. And that's what bothers me. The funds from the sports betting bill that is moving would go for Hope and pre-K, for college scholarships, grants for technical college, and our pre-K program. And then near and dear to my heart is that a provision that has been moving with the sports betting legislation and is part of what passed out today, is a mechanism to force spending of our pent up reserves, extra reserves in the lottery. Every time somebody buys a lottery ticket, the funds go to pre-K and Hope programs. But what a lot of folks don't realize is that on top of the money, I think it's about $1.5 billion that's been spent on Hope and pre-K every year for the last several years. We've got over $1 billion extra that has built up in reserves and is not getting spent. And again, you don't want to spend all of your reserves, but the lottery is very healthy, and no one has ever argued, no economist has ever showed me why anybody would need a reserve fund that's basically the same amount as what we're spending every year. So this is a lot of extra money that people have perhaps thought was going to Hope and Pre-K. That's why we have the lottery. It's not a lottery just to have a lottery. It's a lottery to fund education. And this money has been piling up for years and years. It could be going to strengthen pre-K, could be going perhaps to open more spots, could be going to make sure that there's more money for folks who are going to our four-year colleges and our technical colleges. So that moves with this sports betting legislation. And it's not an exaggeration to say that this provision, because it will force a very conservative percentage of the reserves to be spent every year, will throw off about as much money as I think sports betting alone will generate. So we're talking about a huge infusion for Hope and Pre-K if this bill can make it across. Fingers crossed.
So, fingers crossed. So the bill did pass out of the Senate's Economic Development and Tourism Committee this morning. The next opportunity that we will have for it to be on the floor of the Senate would be as early as Thursday. And I do think that there's a big appetite on the Senate side. Lots of indication from leadership that this is a bill that they are ready to move. I will share with you, though, part of the reason why sports betting has had its challenges every year over and over, it is a couple of things. And part of that is a difference of opinion over whether or not the bill can just pass on its own and that will suffice, or do we actually need a constitutional amendment to go along with it? And so part of the fight is that can we in fact just pass a bill and say we're going to now do sports betting and the money's going to continue to go to education, or do we need to take it basically back to the voters and have it be a ballot referendum where you all decide? So that is part of the fight and the question marks surrounding any of the sports betting bills. This absolutely is the kind of bill that can only get done with bipartisan support. There are people who will always be against the bill, whether it's for religious reasons or for real fears around addiction and gambling. But this is one of those bills and areas that always has to be a bipartisan conversation. So it's exciting to be at the table on that. I think that this particular bill, I think that we have settled, I think, on this idea of really making much bigger investments in pre-K, while Georgia is a state that honestly led in terms of universal pre-K. We don't have enough facilities. We also aren't paying our pre-K teachers nearly as much as we should be paying them. And then we just don't, we have plenty of children on a waiting list. So we want to get more children started earlier, because we know that the earlier that kids get to school and in that environment, the better prepared they are by the time they get to kindergarten, and certainly by third grade, when we really start to look at literacy rates. So a lot of excitement around this bill. And like I said, it could be on the floor as early as Thursday, but we'll have to see what ultimately happens. But sports betting is going to be a topic. And I'd like to say on the Senate, we are like the bills that we have taken up, we haven't done so many, but some of the ones that we've done are really meaty. And we haven't, this one's not been on the floor yet, but we are getting bills out of committee that are very meaty bills, very early, what feels like much earlier in the session than is typical. So trying to clear out the big stuff.
Well, I really hope that will move this week, because one of the other problems I think that sports betting has had over the last few years is that it gets held till the end of the session.
Right.
And then that's when people start holding things hostage for other things, and it gets caught up in things that have nothing to do with sports betting. And so the sooner you pass a bill, the less likely it is that it gets caught up in those kind of fights. So we'll hope that we will hope that happens. You know, we passed a pretty meaty bill just yesterday in the House. It's not a brand new bill. It's a bill that just keeps coming back and seemingly won't die. It's a bill that I haven't supported. And I know it's been a topic on these town hall meetings in the past, and that is a bill relating to the Prosecutorial Oversight Commission that was created. And maybe Kennedy will throw the bill number in the chat, because I have completely forgotten what it is. But y'all will recall that the Prosecutorial Oversight Commission actually passed both the House and the Senate and was signed by the governor last year. But and this is a bill that sets up a commission where folks can put in a complaint about a DA that they think that they're not prosecuting certain kinds of crimes and they wish that they were. This has come up where there have been some Democratic DAs who have spoken publicly about how they are not going to be chasing marijuana possession charges in certain amounts, for example. And there are folks that don't like that. There's obviously also been some concern that this Prosecutorial Oversight Commission would be used to stop the Trump prosecution in Fulton County. And that is not how the bill started. The bill did not start to attack that situation, but it's turned into that because the first case that was put to this commission was actually about the Fulton County DA back during the summer. But part of the legislation last year was that the commission had to adopt rules for how it would conduct its business. And the legislation required that those rules be approved by the Georgia Supreme Court. When those rules were sent to the Supreme Court looked at it and looked at their own jurisdiction and said, we don't think we can approve these rules because we think it's a separation of powers issue, because DAs are technically part of the executive branch. And of course, the Supreme Court is the judicial branch, and they did not think that they should be overseeing rules for anybody within the executive branch. And so they declined to review the rules, certainly did not approve them. And so that meant that the commission couldn't do anything, couldn't move forward because it didn't have rules. So flash forward, and thank you, Kennedy, my wonderful chief of staff, for putting in the chat House Bill 881, which passed the House yesterday, and I guess we'll be moving over to the Senate. What this bill did, and I spoke against it, and we'll include those remarks in our newsletter this weekend. But what this bill does is it says no one needs to look at the rules. The commission can just come up with their own rules, and there's nobody that's going to oversee the rules. I don't support this commission anyway. I think that DAs are already overseen by the state bar. They're overseen by judges that are hearing the cases that they prosecute. And of course, they're overseen by the voters. And if the voters don't think that the DAs are focusing on the right areas of prosecution or otherwise mishandling their jobs, then I think they will see the door. And we saw that happen. We've seen that happen in Metro Atlanta. We saw it happen in Fulton. We've had a change recently. We saw this happen in DeKalb a few years ago when Sherry Boston beat an incumbent at the time. So voters know how to deal with DAs that they don't think are doing what they should be doing. So that's why I'm fundamentally against the bill. But I found it interesting that an oversight bill, when the person that was supposed to oversee, or the body that was supposed to oversee the rules, said we can't do it, instead of coming back with legislation that said someone else should oversee the rules, for example, the state bar or some other nonpartisan body should oversee the rules. No, that is not what happened. They just changed the proponents of the bill just changed the legislation so that no one oversees the rules. This commission generally is already the subject of litigation on other constitutional challenges that will work its way through the court system. So even if House Bill 881 passes and the commission is ultimately able to start work, it's not a foregone conclusion that it will last very long. But I, again, am fundamentally opposed to the bills for the reason I stated, but I'm also just annoyed that when there are so many pressing issues for us to deal with as a legislature, and there are things that only we as a legislature can deal with, that we're spending so much time on this bill. It's been a huge topic of conversation for at least 3 years now. And as many of you probably know, because I've seen some of you at the Capitol lobbying for these things, we're not taking up gun safety legislation, including a safe storage bill, which has overwhelming support, even from some Republican and conservative voters and gun owners. We're not, the Medicaid discussions are slow, even if we are encouraged. There's just so many things that we could be doing that we're not, and instead we're worrying about elected DAs who already have a lot of people looking over their shoulder.
I'll stay on the topic of elected DAs and turn our attention to our elected DA in Fulton County, Fani Willis, because just last week, the Senate passed a resolution So a resolution was brought forward. It's SR 465. It's a Senate Special Committee on Investigation. So we have just, as it passed, and it does not need to go to the House because it's a Senate resolution. It does not need approval from the governor nor the House. So this is a committee that is going to investigate DA Fani Willis and the accusations of misconduct in her office, period. So the committee is going to be, as structured by the resolution, no more than 9 members, 3 of whom must be part of the minority party. We have already named the 3. All of the committee members have been named. That was named by the Committee of Assignments, and the 3 Democrats on the committee happen to be our minority leader, Gloria Butler, Harold Jones, Senator Harold Jones, who is our whip, and then Senator Jason Estevez, who represents Atlanta and Fulton County and is an attorney. So both Senator Jones and Senator Estevez are lawyers, but those 3 will represent the Democrats anyway on this committee. And I don't know yet the timing of when their work will get underway, but this becomes a different vehicle by which they can prosecute a sitting district attorney. The difference on this one is that the committee itself has the authority to subpoena people and have them testify under oath. So you'll know, usually we do hearings and we expect people to be truthful, but in fact, the language in this bill and the authority that is in fact vested in the Senate and the work that we do would allow for people to have to testify under oath and allow us to swear them in and give us the chance to look into books and anything else that the committee may ask. So they are looking for and have found a number of different avenues to be able to deal with district attorneys that they think are out of line. So that is a downer. While we're down, can we maybe turn our attention a little bit to voting? Because we also, that same day, last Friday was a hard day. Last Friday, we passed that bill on the Special Committee on Investigations. We passed a bill that would remove the Secretary of State from the State Election Board. That's SB 358. And we also passed a bill, SB 355, which I know Representative Evans will be very disappointed about, that bans cities and counties from engaging in ranked choice voting. So the state would effectively tell cities and counties that are looking for different ways to handle the runoff situation, which is very, very expensive endeavor. So as they're looking for some efficiencies in the voting process, where it still allows for the largest number of voters to be able to have a say, the state would ban it outright altogether if this particular bill gets out of the House and to the governor's desk and he signs it. It passed in the Senate. It is on its way to the House, and the House will decide whether or not they take it up. But those 3 bills were all done last Friday. They are all pretty substantial bills that really do change the nature of how the state is going to engage in issues around voting, and then of course prosecuting attorneys as well. That was a hard day. I will tell you, that was a very difficult day for us. And again, all 3 of these, just to be clear, passed all along party lines. So there was really not much that we could do to stop these bills. On the election side, I'll add that I just heard word, although I don't know if it's been dropped already, that there is going to be an effort to reduce the runoff period to 2 weeks. So you might recall our runoff period used to be 9 weeks, I believe, and then we passed a law that reduced it to 4 weeks. And now there will be another bill that seeks to reduce it even further to 2 weeks. So there are still some efforts. I would say this, my daughter in the corner of your screen, who there are still some efforts to um just change the ability for people to very easily vote and to be able to be part of this democratic process and to allow themselves to have a voice in who is going to represent them.
Yeah, that bill to ban ranked choice voting for local municipalities and counties is that was tough to hear, because I really felt going into the session that while ranked choice voting across the board probably did not have a chance to pass, even though that's something that I would like to see, I really felt hopeful that we were going to give cities and counties the power to elect to do ranked choice voting if they wanted to. And I thought this was good for a number of reasons. Number one, as Senator Halpern already alluded to, that it's a huge cost savings for these local governments if they can avoid runoff after runoff after runoff. That's very expensive, and you only get fewer voters each time. But also it would be a way to introduce ranked choice voting to folks on a smaller scale, and get comfortable with it, so that hopefully we could do it on a larger scale. So this feels very political, and I'm not sure that it's anything more than a PR bill. That's what I'm hoping at this point. But I think PR bill or not, it at least signals that an actual bill to allow this process is not going to pass, because it's clearly not supported by the lieutenant governor and the Senate leadership. And so that was very, very disappointing. And some of the other election bills that have been discussed, and that I know there's one floating around to investigate the Secretary of State, just tells us that the election deniers and the 2020 election is just not really behind us. And no matter how much evidence to the contrary, no matter how many of the lawsuits from 2020 got thrown out as being frivolous, no matter how much it should be obvious to everyone now that the election wasn't stolen. Perhaps elections are not perfect, and they probably never will be. There's human error involved there, and there are going to be mistakes, but nothing on a large scale that affects the outcome of the election happened in 2020. There's been no proof of it. There's been no proof of rampant voter fraud or vote stealing or people voting that weren't registered to vote on any large scale. But as much as the facts are out over and over again, and I think most folks on this call understand that, the election deniers are still with us, and they are still, beating the drum and introducing these bills, and we have to deal with it because they have a lot of oxygen at the Capitol. Even if they won't ultimately pass all the way, they're getting a lot of oxygen and will continue to. And it also creates these continued safety issues, because I think the more you embolden the election deniers and the folks that feel like government has failed them and stolen an election from them, you continue to have swatting and threats on the lives of certain elected officials, and calling for an investigation of the Secretary of State does nothing to tamp down the violence and the threats that I know his family has experienced. And it's all just deeply depressing and frustrating to watch, not to continue on the down note there, Senator Halpern, but it's hard to deal with. And you keep thinking, okay, we're 4 years removed from this now almost. How much longer are we going to continue to have to deal with legislation and sour grapes, I guess, from 2020? Hopefully not much longer.
I see a question about gun safety bills. Do you want to talk about what you guys have in the House, and then I'll add some thoughts on the Senate?
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully, again, my wonderful Chief of Staff, Kennedy, can put in the chat the bill number for Michelle Al's safe gun storage legislation, which simply provides an incentive for gun owners to have safe storage boxes, containers, and take that extra precaution to just make sure we're keeping guns out of the hands of children that get them accidentally when they're left haphazardly around homes. We're tired of hearing those. I think someone put it in the chat. Thank you. House Bill 971. And it's a bill that has actually gotten support from some pro-gun organizations. And that's very interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how the how the leadership deals with that. The bill did get a hearing toward the end of last session. It was a hearing only. There was no vote taken on it. But there's an effort to move that bill from public safety to public health, which is really where it should be. We know that guns are the #1 killer of children right now. And why we wouldn't consider a bill that would make it less likely that there would be gun violence or guns in the hands of children for accidents. Why we wouldn't consider that a public health bill is really beyond me. That's where it should be. But it's sort of whatever committee it's in, it's clear that the time has come for us to deal with this issue. It's been long ago time for us to deal with it. And this is a small step, but there is a glimmer of hope there, because there have been, like I said, some conservative voices that have talked about how it's a good bill. But then you also have the folks that on the gun lobby side that just see any legislation that touches on guns as some slippery slope to people showing up at your front door and confiscating all your guns, which of course is not the intent of anyone that I'm aware of.
On the Senate side, there are a couple of bills that have been introduced this year that are interesting, because if we have been talking so much about gun safety and safety boxes or lock boxes for your guns, I do think some of that message has seeped in, because there are 2 bills that I want to point out that would allow a tax exemption on the purchase of firearms and firearm safety devices. So you've got SB 340, which does exactly what I just said. It would for anybody who is making a purchase of a firearm or safety devices for their firearms, they would be exempt from tax. SB 344 is similar, except for that it adds in the tax exemption on ammunition and on another of things as an 11-day kind of tax exempt sales period each year to coincide with, I don't want to get this wrong, but I think it's white-tailed deer hunting season. It's actually tailored specifically to 11 days around a particular hunting season, and it would provide also that tax exemption. There are some who are gonna not like these bills, obviously, because there's gonna be the feeling that, by incentivizing people with the tax exemption to purchase guns, that it would contribute to the proliferation of guns. I myself will tell you that I did sign onto SB 340 for the tax exemption on the firearms and the safety devices, because I kind of look at it and say, we got to deal with the environment that we're in. And the environment that we're in is that people own guns, people are buying guns, and I would rather see them stored safely than not. And so if it's going to incent people to go ahead and lock them up at home and keep their homes more safe, or have a lockbox for their cars so that people aren't coming and stealing guns out of their car that are then going to be used in crimes down the road, I would like to encourage that. So we'll see what happens with either one of those bills. They're both in Public Safety Committee. And so I just wanted to point out for you all that those are 2 things. And that feels to me like a slight shift. Both of those bills were introduced by Republicans, and it feels like a little bit of a shift. So we'll see what becomes of them, but I did think that they were worth mentioning.
Yeah, it's just good to know that things are out there and are being discussed, because for so many years there was nothing that was even remotely getting discussed as being something that would move or would have a hearing like what we saw last year. So while it's baby steps, it's steps that we haven't heard before. So it's a step in the right direction. I saw and we're getting close to the end of our time. So if you have any questions, go ahead and throw those in the chat and we'll try to grab them. I did see a question about noise cameras, which has been another topic of conversation on these town halls in the past. Senator Halpern and I have both worked on legislation to try to either create a study committee or outright introduce to Georgians the cameras that would detect noise with the intent of catching the street racing and those that modify their muffler to be very loud and run through our in-town neighborhoods and interrupt your sleep and make your dogs upset. And we had a hearing on one of those bills. I guess it's been 3 years now, and we were encouraged that it was going to move, and then it ultimately did not. That was a study committee bill. And then last year, I was encouraged that Deborah Silcox, who is a Republican, our only Republican in the Atlanta delegation in the House, she was very interested in the legislation and took up the mantle and introduced a bill. And so I thought that would cause it to move, having a member of the majority party leading the charge. But so far, there just has not been any traction on that. And we are still pushing for that legislation. I am still pushing for it, but unfortunately, I don't have any great news right now to that I'm encouraged that it's moving. I am also working on some legislation I don't have it introduced yet to attempt to clamp down, increase fines, however you want to describe it, for those that violate our super speeder laws. And this is not exactly street racing, but in a lot of ways it is. There are folks that are racing on our highways at very, very high speeds that, again, would violate the super speeder laws and causing wrecks. And there was a dear friend of mine, I know of Senator Halpern's, Erica Pines, who has worked in the political space for years in Atlanta. A lot of you on here probably know her. She was the victim of a wreck because of two cars that were racing and slammed her into a wall on the interstate, and she was almost paralyzed. She's doing well now. It's been a long road, but this hit home for a lot of folks, and so it's street racing on our in-town streets. It's the noise from the mufflers on our in-town streets. It's folks that are organizing these activities in a lot of instances, and then you've also got this extra racing, I'll call it, on our highways that is, and this was not an isolated incident. What happened to Erica? It's happening all across our state, and folks are getting hurt. And there's no silver bullet, pardon the pun there, but we have got to do something to make it less inviting for folks to participate, to speed. They're obviously putting themselves at risk. And then, of course, they are hurting innocent bystanders as well. May have saw in the news over the summer, there was some discussion of a bill that would, suspend your license, a discussion of perhaps a bill that would suspend your license on a first offense. That is not something that I would support. I mean, we don't want folks losing their ability to go to school or go to work. There has to be some room for grace, and not everybody that super speeds is racing and causing these horrible wrecks, though they are making bad choices. We've got to strike that balance between teaching and helping and punishment. And I've done Scott Kaplinger, who is my intern from the University of Georgia, is on tonight. He's interning in my office this year. I have had him do a 50-state survey, or actually, I started out asking him to do a 50-state survey, and then I thought, I think it'll be a better use of your time if you just do a survey of the southern states and find out how other states are dealing with the super speeder laws. And so we're comparing those laws right now to see what might be a good solution or a proposal here in Georgia. So stay tuned for that.
Part of the issue with the cameras, which might fascinate you, is that there's at least in the Senate, there's a difference of opinion on how people want to use technology for ticketing people. Basically, like we're having conversations about even like the school zone cameras. And, how are they being used? Is it okay or not okay, really, for people to get ticketed outside of kind of the school zone timeframes? Same thing with the red light cameras. The noise cameras are getting caught up in that conversation as well. MARTA wants to have a bus lane for their BRT, a dedicated bus lane. So there was the study committee about the cameras for the MARTA buses. So, I mean, all of these conversations are happening simultaneously, and we're taking them up one by one, but they really are the same conversation. So we kind of have to work through some of the kinks in just directionally how we want to go and how we want to think about them, and do we want to understand that they're a force multiplier for our law enforcement, or how do we want our law enforcement to use the technology that we make available to them? With the noise cameras, for those who don't know on the call, of course, we wanted to give the option to the local municipality to decide whether or not they wanted to use them. We certainly weren't going to ever force people to have to spend dollars in order to be able to purchase them and use them. So it's still the fight that we're in. And hopefully one day we'll get, kind of beyond the conversation piece to the part where we're able to come back and tell you, well, yes, we were finally able to get that over the line, because it is an ongoing problem all these many years later, and it doesn't seem to be going away or changing.
Yeah, unfortunately. I see a question in the chat about House Bill 895 and House Bill 143 regarding elimination on capital gains on precious metals, and also protection of the use of virtual currency. Senator Halpern, if you want to weigh in on those, I'm going to have to, if it's left to me, I need to look up those bills. Those are not bills that I have heard that are moving, or that I have any specific knowledge on right now. So I have to research that one and get back to you. Unless Senator Halpern knows about them. Okay.
Yeah, I don't.
I did see a question about the marshland bill that passed out of House Judiciary Committee today. That is a bill, for those that are not aware, it is an issue down on the coast where we have marshlands where folks will have their private property includes marshland. And what folks want to be able to do in some instances is go through a quiet title process to have clear title to the marshland. This is what's being presented to us, that they want to put it into a conservation easement, which obviously has some tax benefits to the person that uses it, but also would allow for some conservation activities to take place on the marshland, to bring it back more to its original state. That's the description given for the folks that want to make a change in what I'm about to tell you. So folks own the property, it includes the marshland, but they don't have a quiet title to the marshland part of their property to be able to put it into a conservation easement. If you want to do that, if you really want to get wonky in real estate, you should have been in House Judiciary Committee last week when we had like a 3-hour hearing on this. And then the bill was voted out today. But if you want a quiet title and be able to take advantage of the conservation easement, you have to prove that you have had an unbroken title to that marshland dating back to the king. It's called a king's grant or a governor's grant from obviously long time ago. That's very hard. Tracing title that long is very hard. The presumption currently in the law is that it is the state's land. And so if you can't prove that unbroken chain of title, you can't quiet the title, and you can't get the quiet title so that you can put the property into a conservation easement and either do the conservation activities or get the tax benefit. So the legislation that was brought forward was to basically change the presumption. And so unless the state can prove that you didn't have a broken chain of title, then you clear title and you can go through this conservation easement process. This was a bill that I voted against in committee. The Southern Environmental Law Center, Sierra Club, a lot of environmental groups are against this because they worry what it will ultimately do to the marshland. I have those concerns. I also have some very practical concerns, which are that the Department of Natural Resources for the state of Georgia, regardless of this quiet title process, will still have ultimate responsibility for upkeep of the marshes. So no matter what, no matter whether you got a clear title or not, the state still has to patrol the marshland and take care of it. And that's obviously a very costly situation. And if folks are quieting title and putting these lands in conservation easements, which means they're paying less taxes, and you have less money available to do the upkeep in any event. And there's nothing under this legislation that requires anybody to do conservation actions. They can say we're putting the land into a conservation easement, but it doesn't mean that any conservation activity will actually take place. So it sounds like a very specific bill for very specific folks that are looking for a financial benefit. And I have no problem with people having a financial benefit. That's not my objection. But it really is a taking of, or it's a potential taking of state land, because if you switch the presumption, it just seems like, and we're also going to limit, this bill would limit the time that the state has to try to prove that the title has been broken. I think you're going to see a lot of these titles being quieted, and it's concerning. It's a bill that came up right toward the end of session last year and didn't make it by sine die, and then came back this year. And so that's probably what's moving. It's out of committee. It'll move now to rolls, and we'll see if it passes the floor, and then it may be over in Senator Halpern's chamber soon. And then I saw a question about the Okefenokee Swamp bill, still stuck in committee. Unfortunately, I don't have any better news about that. Any environmental stuff moving on your end, Senator Halpern?
Maybe. I actually signed on to a Solar Act bill for 2023. We have been working all through the interim to rework that bill. That was a bill that would really increase the opportunities for both community solar, but also net metering. The net metering part is the part that Georgia Power really took exception to, because that had to deal with the rate that they would pay back for the savings of other people generating electricity. Anyway, all of that is to say, a lot of work has been done over the interim, and a new bill will be introduced soon, which I'm really excited to, well, the sub will be introduced soon. It will go back to the committee, and hopefully we'll be able to get that onto the floor. And it would focus specifically and solely on community solar, and allowing not-for-profit churches to be able to take smaller parcels of land, so 10 acres, maybe 30 acres, and have solar fields on that smaller acreage, but it would be a huge cost reduction to the consumer ultimately. I mean, solar it's the cheapest form of energy in our state, and having a better diversity of energy sources is really something that's going to be necessary for our cities that have created clean energy goals by 2030. The only way that we're going to get there is to expand solar. So that sub has not been introduced yet, but it will be, and I feel pretty confident that that will get to the Senate floor.
That's good news. Well, we are coming up toward the end of our time. I see there were some other questions about health effects from mufflers. I couldn't agree more that that's a concern, and I hope that that gets into the discussion. And then I don't have any news about tree canopy bills, but we'll add that along with those the precious metal and the virtual currency questions. Kennedy will make sure to make notes of that, and everyone who's on here will get an email thanking you for coming. And then we'll also, when we have the answers to the questions that we didn't get to in the chat, and we'll check to make sure we didn't miss anything else, we'll put that in an email to you as well. And then otherwise, I'll give some closing comments, and Senator Halpern, flip it to you, and then we'll wish y'all a good night. But I put my information in the chat, and Kennedy's put hers in, and I know Senator Halpern will do it too if she hasn't already. Just feel free to reach out to us. If you hear legislation that's moving, whether you're for it or against it, if you want to, please let us know, and don't assume that we know what you know. Particularly if you have an expertise by training or personal experience, please make sure to share it with that. Things move fast, and there's a lot of things that can be missed if they're not in my committee between the time that they're in whatever committee they're in and by the time they get to the House floor. So don't hesitate to reach out. I welcome that. I know Senator Halpern does too, and we want to hear from you. And of course, as always, if you have any issues with state agencies that we can help with, please let us know that. And then a special request for all of you, we every year we do road naming bills, naming roads, naming bridges, naming roundabouts. for folks that are in our communities that we want to honor for their contribution to our city, to our neighborhoods. These should be, the rule generally is that the roads, bridges, and roundabouts, that we name them for folks that have passed away. We don't usually name roads and bridges after folks that are still with us. So think of folks that have passed, that have made contributions to the communities, to our neighborhoods, to the city. And please share those suggestions with us, at either me or Kennedy, and we will see about honoring them by naming a road, bridge, or a roundabout after them. But thank you for coming. I'll flip it to Senator Halpern, and please don't be strangers. Thank you for tuning in. Look out. We'll put out a save the date for the next town hall very shortly. Thank you for being here tonight.
I want to also echo a thank you. I'm going to add one additional thing for you all to think about. In addition to road namings, we do have a page program in both the House and the Senate, where young people from the ages of 12 to 18 can come and actually help us do the business of the day while we're in the chambers. So just an encouragement. We have a very limited number of pages that we can actually have come through our offices each session, but just opening it up as an invitation for each of you to think about young people in your life that you know who would love the experience of being in the Capitol, seeing the process firsthand, and being able to participate with us doing our work while we're down there. You know, I'm gonna, even though we're at the end, I wanna tell you about one other bill that I'm excited about, and there's others, but just today, what passed out of the Economic Development and Tourism Committee is a bill that I authored that would institute a Georgia statewide music office. In the same way that we are doing such great work in film, Georgia has a thriving music ecosystem, and with a statewide office coordinating that efforts and marketing it, and creating strategic partnerships, I think that we can even grow that industry even more. So I'm excited about that. Stay tuned on that one, because I'm pretty confident that I can get that to the Senate floor. And that is going to be a true economic development initiative. So stay tuned for that. I think Danielle, my aide, has put her information in. I also do a weekly newsletter during session. If you go to Sonia4ga.com, you can sign up to get my weekly newsletter. I welcome each and every one of you. If you come down to the Capitol, please let me know in advance, or even once you get there. We're in chambers. Come and get me out onto the ropes. Would love to have one-on-one conversations, hear what's on your mind, and see how we might be able to, you know, push forward any of the ideas that you have, or certainly be able to hear and better articulate the things that we know are most important to you. So thank you for spending your, gosh, it's only Tuesday. Thank you for spending your Tuesday night with us. We will do this again just after crossover. So please look for our notices so that you can check back in with us, and we can tell you what actually at that point stand a chance of actually getting to the governor's desk and signed into law. And until next time, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a wonderful night.
Yay.
I survived.
I was like about to
Literally.
die. I was about to say Kennedy a text, like, just cancel it. This is cursed. I can't. My computer, I couldn't get on my computer. I could not get on my phone. I finally got on my phone, and then of course I can't see anything. So I ended up being able to get on my tablet. So it was a little bit easier, but I have no idea what happened. But anyway, it works.
That was great. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think
Yeah.
that was really good. We covered a ton. We always end up covering a whole lot.
We
And
do.
the people on this call, they're so well attuned to what we're doing. They're very informed about the process and what's happening at the state level, the county level, the city level. So I hope, and everybody gave such great, commentary to us in the chat. So hopefully they walked away learning something that they didn't know before. But this session's wackadoodle. Like, it's so busy.
It's so weird. It's so weird.
We're taking up, I think, like Friday, we took up those 3 bills on Friday. These are big bill. Do you know what I mean? Like, these aren't small things. We are definitely in the Senate. We are moving big things fast.
Yeah, I don't-
Yeah.
And Lieutenant Governor, as a general rule, I mean, I think he really has the posture of, we'll put it out there, we'll see what happens with it, right? Like, it'll go the way it's gonna go. So some of these things he knows are definitely gonna move, and he's made them hit his priorities. I'm excited for when we get to the part about workforce. We have several really outstanding bills that are definitely gonna pass, that will deal with clearing barriers to entry for people that are really, really strong. Hope this House will pick them up and run with them too.
Yeah, I hope so too. We'll see. Yeah, that was great. And I was afraid we were, because there's a lot that I don't know. I mean, I feel like there's a lot that is just so amorphous that I don't even really want to talk about it. And so, but somehow we ended up talking about a lot. So
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
it worked. Okay, well, we'll look at the calendar,
Yeah.
see what looks good for after crossover day, and we can go ahead and get that set just so we have it on the calendar. I guess we could go ahead and set one for Kennedy. Let's try to set one. Let's try to just set them both. Maybe
Yeah.
we know when Sonny died.
That's right. We know where we know
Yeah.
the dates for everything. Yeah, that'll be
I will
great.
do that. Okay.
And when is crossover day again? February 28th?
28th, I believe.
It's the
Okay.
29th.
I
Yeah,
was
and
gonna say, my only
the only
request
reason
is never on the 15th of March. That's my birthday.
yeah, it's crossover day is February 29th, and I know that because it's Ashley's birthday.
Oh.
Oh,
My leap year baby.
Yeah.
yes.
Kennedy, are you able to capture the chat so we can just make sure we didn't miss any questions?
Yep, I got it saved and I got it
Okay.
all recorded. And yeah, that should be, I'll link all that in the newsletter.
Okay, and see if you can find out about those bills that they were asking about.
Yeah, those were so ultra specific. I was like, there's
Yeah.
no way. There's literally no way. Yeah, I'll get into that.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right.
All
Thanks,
right.
everybody.
Success. Thank you. I'll see you
Right,
at the Capitol tomorrow.
See you later.
Bye.